Hi, I'm Andrew Liptak, the Guest Services and Public Relations Coordinator for the Vermont Historical Society, and I have a couple of spectacular items from our library collection that I'd like to share with you today. These are a pair of Marvel comic books, The Avengers issue 83 from 1970 and Avengers 119 from 1973. Marvel has been publishing comic books since it was founded in 1939, and you've probably heard of some of its most famous characters like Captain America, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Black Panther, and plenty of others. The stories of these characters were created by teams of writers and artists, often working off of outlines and story beats that were conceived of by Marvel's editor Stan Lee. Individual comic characters often headlined their own series of comic books, and where they'd go off on their own adventures for that issue, and then you'd go off and get another issue. In 1960, DC Comics, Marvel's rival publisher, decided to bring together a bunch of their popular characters in a team-up called the Justice League, and they launched it as its own comic series. These comics sold really well, and Marvel saw this and decided to adopt the same idea. So it brought together some of its existing heroes for a team-up called the Avengers. Since then, team-ups have been this enduring trope in the world of comic books, and who doesn't love to see their favorite heroes working and fighting side by side? These comics have been the basis for a massive superhero film franchise called the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you might be thinking, much of the action takes place in New York City or some far-flung place around the world. What does this have to do with Vermont? That's where these comics come in. They're both set in the Green Mountain State, and specifically in Rutland. While these comics might have featured fantastical adventures around the Earth and beyond, fans of the comics are everywhere, including here in Vermont. There was one fan from the Rutland area named Tom Fagen, who was a huge fan of comics from both Marvel and DC. For years, Rutland had gotten into the Halloween spirit, and in 1960, the City of Rutland's Recreation Department decided to put together a Halloween parade, which included bands and marchers dressed up in costume. This was a huge success, and Fagen, being a comic book fan, approached a friend at the rec department and suggested that a big comic book character like Batman would make a really big draw. And in 1961, Batman made an appearance in that year's parade. Fagen was heavily involved in comics fandom and began writing letters to fanzines and to the letter columns published in the comics about the event. He wrote to one of Marvel's in-house writers, Roy Thomas, who eventually became the editor-in-chief of Marvel. He had met him at a convention a couple years before and invited him to the parade that year. So Thomas and some of his fellow writers made a trip up to Rutland for the 1964 parade. Batman and comics hit their stride in the 1960s, and the Rutland Halloween parade continued to grow every year with a whole host of comic book characters taking part. And in 1970 and the 10th anniversary of the parade, the story turns full circle. Thomas decides to include the Rutland Halloween Parade in one of his upcoming comics, Avengers 83. And this wasn't an advertisement for the parade. This was the event taking part in the story itself. The story in this issue revolves around a supervillain who's plotting his revenge against the Avengers team, who happened to be in Rutland for the parade. There's a fight ensues, and just as he's about to get the upper hand and beat the Avengers, an all-female team of superheroes called the Liberators shows up and saves them, and they go and enjoy the parade. Rutland and the Halloween parade shows up in a handful of other comics over the years, both from Marvel and DC, and Fagen himself actually shows up as a character a couple times. The city's most recent appearance was in a DC comic called Superboy and the Ravers number 16 in 1997. Fagen was a fixture in the parade for decades, but eventually stepped back and handed over the reins to others in the mid-2000s, and sadly he died in 2008, just days before that year's parade. In 2023, Rutland honored him by unveiling a monument honoring the legacy of the parade, and it features Fagen shaking Batman's hand. You can find it in downtown. I grew up loving comic books, and what I really love about these two issues is that it brings Vermont into this fictional world of superheroes. But more than that, what it really shows is that there are fans of these stories that exist everywhere, including here in Vermont. Thank you for watching. To learn more about Vermont's history, visit our website and follow us on social media.